deaf, hearing impaired. I try not to use the word deaf because signing deaf community sometimes don't like people that have cochlear implants to use that term, so I just like to say hearing impaired. I do have 2 cochlear implants on both sides.
I am deaf with a capital D. I have bilateral cochlear implants that are implanted right under the scalp and go actually into my inner ear and act kind of as a prosthetic ear, kind of forcing my ears to work, for lack of a better description. That's what it is.
So my disability is kind of complicated. There's not a ton of diagnosis yet, but basically I had 2 spinal surgeries when I was in high school. Since then I've had really bad back pain and hip pain. I'm currently using a cane. Also my freshman year developed sort of headache, migraine, and that resulted in vertigo, so the room's constantly amusement ride, and it hasn't stopped since my freshman year. I also just got esophagus surgery, so I've been navigating around that. So just a whole multitude of fun things.
So my disabilities are depression, anxiety, and ADHD. I was diagnosed clinically when I was a sophomore in high school. I remember that because when I was given what I was going through in class, everyone was like, oh, that's a textbook definition of ADHD. That was the only thing diagnosed. The anxiety and depression only came out after I went to talk therapy. Even when I was a kid, I was just all over the place and got into a lot of trouble, and it was very bad socially, which is a lot of the symptoms of ADHD at a young age. So I was like, well, that's cool. Now there's a word for it now. It was amazing.
I had scoliosis. I got diagnosed at the end of my freshman year in high school. Went in a back brace for about 8 months. The back brace wasn't helping, so they did spinal fusion. My body was like, we don't really like this. So it rejected the rods, so I had to get them removed the second semester of my senior year.
I'm not exactly sure what happened because when I was born, there was no hearing test. So, and I was also really, really sick when I was really young, so we don't know if it was because of that or if I was just born deaf, but either way, around 18 months, my parents just kind of noticed that I wasn't responding to sounds. They figured it out and they decided to implant me with cochlear implants, and it's been a process, but here we are.
I was born with a little bit of hearing that decreased over time exponentially. They didn't find out I was deaf until my little brother was born. He is 2 years younger than me, and then at one of his pediatric appointments, they heard me talking and they were like, maybe she might be deaf too. And so they put me in the testing booth, and lo and behold, I failed it. And they were like, oh, she's deaf too. And then that's when I was fitted with, I call them old people hearing aids. They're not really old people hearing aids. And since that didn't really work, when I was 8, I got 1 cochlear implant, and then I got the other when I was 12.
I personally was just really lucky for my mom, first of all, because she, in the early years, quit her job. We were a 1-income household for a while because she was just at home, literally, with flashcards, teaching me, how to, say specific words and everything. So that was the biggest support in the early years.
A lot of hearing parents have a deaf child, and that deaf child is the first deaf person that those parents meet. It was definitely the case for my parents, and with them being young, and they're like, well, we're gonna do whatever we can to foster a loving and growing environment, which I was really lucky to have.
My parents and my sister have always been very supportive, but it's definitely hard on them too, because my parents had to take me to a lot of doctor appointments growing up. Making those spaces a learning experience and a bonding experience, I think took some time. I have a twin sister. I think her being so different health-wise was both challenging for both of us. So I definitely got more attention at home because I was sick, but she got that normal student experience. So I think we both were challenged in that regard.
My brother is also deaf. We're the only 2 deaf people in my family. It's this weird genetic mutation, and we had kind of that special connection just because we understand each other's experiences a little more.
So that's a really weird kind of question because there's an assumption of a support system, right? But we haven't even gone to a place where it's okay to acknowledge the problem, let alone have a support system for it. My relatives were like, by the way, this is all bullshit. So, when you get fed that as a kid, you just believe it. And then later you're like, oh wait, no, I'm actually need help. That's, like, I could not go to therapy, but, like, that's not a good idea. It gets even worse because there's also expectations and also being the minority, the model minority. We don't have problems. We just have doctors and engineers.
I just kind of had to, like, deal with it. It wasn't really an option. Like, I guess my family just felt that wasn't enough support for, like, upward mobility, like, in the world. So, like, I had, like, certain, like, disability, like, accommodations and stuff like that. But I always hated them because when I was little, I found that, like, my friends or, like, my peers around me would, like, not make fun of me, but sort of, like, give me, like, a second look.
First experience with, I guess, chronic illness or disability actually was in 7th grade. So I had IBS, so a lot of stomach issues. I missed 60 days of school. I think that was where I first kind of had to navigate being sick and then being in school. A lot of my friends at that age didn't really understand why I was constantly missing. I remember a girl seeing me in the clinic and being like, oh, I thought you moved. Navigating that emotionally and then also navigating school physically. So how can I go to school? How can I make that more accessible for me? Definitely was a challenge.
When people without disabilities accommodate people with disabilities, the people without the disabilities try to fix the world in a way that an able-bodied person would see needs to be fixed, which may not necessarily be what a disabled person needs. Well, I had an FM system, which is a microphone that's attached to the teacher and fed basically into my hearing aid. Sounds great when you think about it, like it makes things louder. For me, amplifying sound isn't what I necessarily needed. What I needed was access to sight, and because I principally communicated and received information through lip reading, for a hearing person to say, oh, we just need to turn it louder. If she can't hear it, we can just turn it louder. And that was something that was a huge frustration for me. They would bring the FM system to the classroom, they would fit it, set it up, and then I would just not use it. I would just tell the teacher to put it back in the box. After the 5th time of me telling them I didn't want it, and they still brought it to the school, that's when I realized this is a formality. It's more a formality than them actually listening to what I needed. When I came, I visited the Goldman Center. I said I needed a note taker for my first semester. I had 2 note takers. They were wonderful, and they really helped in my transition and giving me advice, and them definitely advocating for me when I was like, no, it's fine. They were like, we need.
I think it was very hard at first. I don't want to say homeschooled, but I was having to take all online classes my 2nd semester senior year. So readjusting to being in class was definitely a huge adjustment for me. But then once I found that groove, I really liked it. College, you try to find that balance between work life and, like having fun. And then with chronic illness, you have this like whole other factor that impacts everything. And I also have stuff that like demands me to just shut down and like take that time to recover. And so finding that balance has been really, really difficult.
In like the residence halls, I wanted a like flashing fire alarm so that if there's a fire in the middle of the night, like I'm not gonna sleep through it and die and like can wake up. Getting that was a whole process through Tulane. That was probably like one of the most frustrating things ever. All the Goldman Center can do is just tell other people what to do. Like, so they just call facilities and are like, hey, you need to put like this thing in the student's room and like do it now. And facilities didn't do it for like 2 months. I
have not understood a word President Fitz has said, except for maybe the word Tulane, which is problematic. I've been here for 3 years. Like, I really should actually understand what my president is saying. I heard there were captionists at graduation, but I would hope that I would see a captionist before graduation. I don't want that to be the first interaction I have with the first full process of communication I have with my president.
I lived in Greenbaum my freshman year, and they have specific rooms for like accessibility. They have like the built-in fire alarms, they have like wheelchair bathrooms, things like that. The reason why I wasn't in that room was because I was coming in as a freshman and the sophomores had like housing time slots like before I did. So like these 2 sophomores, they just wanted a bigger room and a bigger bathroom like picked that room because they didn't like block that off for students that might need it and then give it to, you know, people later.
Oh no. I had a bed shaker for the fire alarm, which was attached to my bed. Great, like I gotta go and walk in and I'm like, oh look, there's a fire alarm, like wonderful. It turns out this fire alarm was triggered by the sound of the other fire alarms going off. So anything that sounded remotely loud or like a fire alarm would set off the bed shaker. If I turned on my hairdryer, it would set off the alarm. I was FaceTiming my girlfriend one time and my volume's always up naturally, and she laughed really loud and it was like kind of a shriek laugh, and that set off the fire alarm.
Tulane, I think, has a while to go on accommodating with disabilities. I think the number of buildings that are not compliant with ADA regulations, I mean, Newcomb had, one, it's a mess, but two, I mean, it's just like not accessible very much. I would say there's definitely professors who have been accommodating. Originally, I was like, I need to accommodate what they demand of me. And now I'm like, no, I need to be accommodated. So I can't meet those demands. Those demands need to meet me.
Talk a lot of talk and they speak the right words. Like I said, no problem with the Goldman Center. They are great, but they can't actually do anything. They're not giving them any power to like actually provide the accessibility that they need. They're at least acknowledging it and they're talking about it, but they're not doing it effectively and doing it well.
It's no worse than any accessibility centers that I've worked with. I'll say that for sure. And they've definitely been accommodating when I've asked for things. I do have to be persistent in asking for things though.
I think sometimes the testing center isn't always accessible. I love them, but they're not always accessible. I know I had a surgery planned last semester around finals, and I really had to advocate for myself about why I needed that change, and was told it didn't qualify for a change. And I was like, I'm going to the surgery whether I fail this class or not. I'd really prefer not to fail the class because I've worked very hard in it. I think they try their best, but I think there's a lot more progress that I really hope to see.
Accommodations for events outside of the classroom, that's when it gets really tricky. They're like, well, we have to talk to this person and then to this person, and it goes on, and then I'm like, is it even worth it? What if I don't feel like going to this event? At the end, that should be paid as much attention to, especially when the administrator's talking or there's a town hall for USG. That should be given just as much attention and care as a classroom setting.
I think I applied twice and I've never heard back from them both times that I've applied. But this was only like freshman year, like each semester freshman year. I didn't do it any time after that, and everyone was like, oh, you should try again. It's like, no, dude. There's also the feeling of like whatever I have is not the same as other disabilities, and it doesn't warrant like anything to do with the Goldman Center, because like this is just my brain, right? And other kids like who desperately need the services just to be on an even playing field is what I feel like they're for. So I would feel like I'm taking advantage of the system.
It takes so much energy to like actually like listen to someone and like be present with someone, and like having to adapt to like a world that's just like used to just hearing things all the time and like jumping from one conversation to another. Like I can do that with like a lot of effort. So like I just feel like really tired like, at the end of the day.
I really want to make the most of my Tulane experience, but sometimes like I'll be in class and I'll be like, I really just need to be in bed right now. It's like this extreme need to rest my body. Like it's not, oh, I didn't get enough sleep the night before. It's like I could get 12 hours of sleep the night before and still need to take a break and rest my body.
It's really just the really mundane things, like going to the store, getting up and getting ready to go to the store, go to class. Like every day that knob gets harder to open or turn.
People have such biases and such unrecognized opinions about people with disabilities that I feel and I experience, whether somebody knows it or not, And so having to be a constant advocate for myself and a constant advocate for other people with disabilities who I may not necessarily know their experiences is a lot of pressure.
The second thing that I think is the hardest is advocating for myself, and then around that is having invisible illnesses versus visible illnesses. So for a while I was all invisible, and then last semester I started using a cane, and I think that has taken a very interesting turn in forming my identity. I interact with people very differently now since I've started using the cane. In that regard, they view me differently, which I don't always love.
My experience is definitely my own, and it's not representative of the entire community. It's not representative of the LGBT community. It's not representative of the deaf community. It's representative of me, of myself.
Find other people that may be going through something like similar to you, just so that like you can at least bond like a little bit and know that you're not the only one, because you're not the only one at Tulane. People are here and people do want to support you. You just kind of have to go out there and actually look for it. They don't come to you.
There's professors here that I absolutely love. Professor Gleckler is one of them, Dr. Rajan, and a whole list of others that I would be like, any day, just like hop in their office, be like, hey, how you doing?
Be persistent about it. Once you get to college, no one's going to advocate for you but yourself. People aren't going to know what you need unless you say what you need. Especially for people without disabilities, especially for people who are completely able-bodied with maybe no marginalized part of themselves. Be that person for yourself.
You're going to go through days where you don't think you can do it anymore, where you're like, school is not an option for me. Keep sticking through it. Think about what you need. Don't be embarrassed to ask for something. I found a lot of professors and the Goldman Center overall to be very accommodating. I don't think Tulane is automatically an accessible place, but it can be. But you have to be the one that's navigating that and finding that.